In today's lesson, I'm going to combine lesson 4 and lesson 5 because they're pretty similar. 5 just builds off of 4 as far as looking at angles and sides and whether they're congruent or not. So I'll just dive right into 4 and then I'll jump right into 5 right afterwards. So it might be a little longer video. So they're defining a quadrilateral. A quadrilateral is a polygon with 4 sides and 4 angles. And this says measure the sides and angles of each figure to determine if any are congruent, then determine if any sides are parallel. Complete the table. So if you have a ruler that you can measure, that's awesome. If you don't, that's okay. You can ballpark it. It's not going to trick you too often. If it looks like they're equal or congruent, they probably are. Same thing with angles later on. So in this chart, it wants you to list all the figures, 1, 2, 3, and 4, that have opposite sides congruent. So if you look at figure 1, they aren't equal in length, so we're going to say that figure 1 isn't one of those that has opposite sides congruent. Figure 2, these are my opposite sides. They look like they're the same length. I'm going to say figure 2 is congruent on opposite sides. Same with figure 3. And figure 4. So again, the opposite sides are the same length. Opposite sides are parallel, meaning that they won't cross. So this line is slanted down, this one is going, so they're going to cross eventually. Same with this line here. If we were to extend it up, it's going to go like that, and this one will run into it and cross over it. So again, figure 1, no, but opposite sides in figure 2, they're never going to cross. If we extend these lines as far as we can, forever and ever, they will never ever cross. So 2, the opposite sides are parallel. Same thing with 3 and 4. So again, the opposite sides, this side and this side, will never cross in their lines. Opposite angles are congruent. So when we look across opposite here, this one looks like it's about a 90 degrees, maybe a little less. This one is way less. This one's an obtuse one, and this one's acute. So none of those angles are going to be congruent or equal. And this one, though, we have an angle here and an angle here. Again, we're not too worried about measuring it. They look like they're about the same angle. Same with these two acute angles here. So I'm going to say figure 2, yes. Figure 3, yes. And figure 4, yes. Because again, these are all right angles. This is a rectangle, and this is a square. These are all 90-degree angles. So each figure, 1, 2, 3, and 4, has 4 sides. They all have that in common, and 4 angles. Okay, I'm going to skip these two and just jump right into the back side. Give you a little practice. Actually, I think I'm going to actually just go ahead and jump into page 925, and we'll try this whole page real quick. So it says to, again, measure the sides and angles of each figure to determine if any are congruent or parallel, then answer exercises 7 through 13. So, complete the attributes or the characteristics of figure 1. Opposite sides are blank and blank. Well, are they congruent? No, they're all different sizes, so they're not congruent. And you can abbreviate congruent. And they are not parallel because, again, if we take this line, it's going to go down this way and it's going to cross into this opposite one. Same with this one here. If we go up and extend it out, it's going to come clear up here and this line will cross it eventually as well. So they're not congruent and they're not parallel. Again, I'm going to abbreviate both of those. Opposite angles are also not congruent in figure 1. Right, we're looking opposite. This angle is way bigger here than this one here, and this one here is bigger than this little guy here. So they're not congruent. But the figure is still a quadrilateral. It has 4 sides and 4 angles. So figure 2, again we're going for the attributes. Figure 2, the opposite sides are parallel. Right? They're not going to run into each other. So they're parallel. And they're, sorry, I should have put congruent first. They're congruent and parallel because this side is the equal length Again, if you want to measure it, you can. Those sides are equal in length, and these sides are also equal in length. The opposite sides match up. So they're congruent and parallel. Opposite angles are also, these two angles match, and this big angle here matches this big angle here. So they're also congruent angles. So the opposite angles are congruent. The figure still has 4 sides, and it also has 4 angles. It says, which figures have all the attributes of figure 1? So looking at figure 1, none of these figures have the same attributes, right? There's not another figure that has sides that are not congruent. There's not another figure that has angles that aren't congruent. And there's not another figure that doesn't have opposite sides parallel. So none of these figures are going to have the same attributes as figure number 1. Which figures have all the attributes of figure number 2? So again, looking at figure number 2's attributes, the opposite sides are congruent and parallel, and the opposite angles are congruent. They have 4 sides and 4 angles. So looking at this, number 3, yes, opposite sides are congruent, angles are congruent, 4 sides, same with 4 and 5. So 3, 4, and 5 all have the same attributes as figure number 2. Which figures have all the attributes of figure number 3? So figure number 1 obviously doesn't. Figure number 2 has opposite sides congruent, opposite angles congruent, and the opposite sides are parallel. So we're going to say that anything oh, sorry. Sorry, I got goofed up, I think. Let me see. Oh yeah, sorry, number 11, down here. So which have all the attributes of figure number 3. So the opposite sides are equal or congruent. It also has 490. All the angles are congruent. The only one that matches that perfectly, where the sides are even and the angles are all even and congruent, is going to be figure number 5. Because here, the angles, though the opposite ones match, they're different angles here. Okay, it says which figures have 4 right angles. Again, figure number, sorry, I'm not showing you very well. Figure number 3 and figure number 5, the rectangle and the square. And which figures have 4 equal sides. The only one where all the sides are congruent is going to be figure number 5. Alright, so, sorry, I didn't show you that very well. And now I'm going to jump into lesson 5, just do a little bit of that for you. So now we're going to classify the quadrilaterals. So now that we know some of the attributes that we're looking at, we're going to classify them. You've probably done this before last year, but it's a good refresher for you. So it says you can classify quadrilaterals using one or more attributes like congruent sides, parallel sides, and right angles. The example 1. Trina cut out polygon mats to use for her travel photos. Use the figures below to determine the missing attributes of each type of quadrilateral. Again, this is lesson 5. So here's your quadrilateral. These are the different types that we're going to have. So the trapezoid is a quadrilateral with exactly blank pair of opposite sides parallel. So these two right here, these two sides are parallel. These two sides here are not parallel. So it has one pair of opposite sides that are parallel. So it's kind of a wonky looking shape. And then we have a rectangle, which is parallelogram with 4 right angles. Okay, we have a parallelogram, which is a quadrilateral with opposite sides congruent, and excuse me. Don't mind me, just coughing fit. Sorry, a parallelogram. Sorry, I should have started with this one first before I went to rectangle. A parallelogram is a quadrilateral with opposite sides congruent and parallel. I'm going to abbreviate. I'll just write it. And parallel. So this is a parallelogram. Within parallelograms, you have rectangles because the opposite sides are congruent and parallel, but a rectangle also has 4 right angles. Within parallelograms, you also have rhombuses, which is a parallelogram with 4 sides congruent, but again, not right angles. And then you have a square, which is a parallelogram with 4 sides congruent. So all of the sides are equal and it has 4 right angles. So a square has all the attributes or characteristics of a rectangle and a rhombus. So all squares are also going to be rectangles, rhombuses, and parallelograms. Right? It falls under and matches all these attributes. I'm going to jump to page 931 and do let's do number 3, and then I'll call this video over. So, describe the attributes of each quadrilateral, then classify the quadrilateral. And if you need to refer back to, sorry, not this page, back to the front page, which I think I just tucked under here. Refer back to this, okay? So, again, describe it with sides and angles, words like congruent and parallel. So, opposite sides are congruent because this side is the same length as this one, and this length matches this one. So opposite sides are congruent and parallel. Now, we have we have angles that are not right angles, but the opposite angles match. So opposite angles are congruent. Opposite angles congruent. But all the sides aren't congruent, so we know it's not a rectangle because it doesn't have, all the sides aren't congruent, we know it's not a square. They don't have 4 right angles, so we know it's not a rectangle. I think it falls under the category of a parallelogram. Parallelogram. Okay, that should get you started. Again, refer back to the video, refer back to the examples, and you will do just fine. And as usual, holler at me if you have any troubles.